Listening in on that is Professor Alex van der Heever. He's with the Wits School of Governance, and he joins us now to take a look at the impact that this will have, if at all, Prof, on the work of Parliament. But before we get into that, because the allegation here is soliciting bribes, you would have heard in that package by my colleague Junior Kumalo about the head of Mkhombe Marine. They were also facing charges, and on the 1st of March this year, all the charges against this particular individual had been dropped. And then we get news of Mapisa-Nqakula being implicated in all of this. What information have you been able to interact with that at least gives us something to interrogate about whether she is in the wrong or not? Or is it too early?
Well, I think it is too early to sort of determine. This is part of an investigation. And as part of an investigation, typically along these lines is that if you're dealing with corrupt individuals in the state, that sometimes the parties that they interacted with, a prosecution could be dropped in exchange for them giving full details of exactly what transpired. And this will often be the case if you're attempting to deal with somebody who's, let's say, involved in in such a senior position that the kind of corruption and improper and abusive power that you're looking at is systemic. And so you go for the biggest fish. So I think that might be what has happened, in that essentially people who are party to this illicit transaction have agreed to give evidence. And on the strength of that, it allows them to go forward and prosecute the sort of the key linchpin in the whole arrangement.
You speak of the seniority of the position, and of course perceptions are everything. Do you perceive that the relevant law enforcement authorities would not move unless they had the necessary evidence, right? So they had receipts, they have audio, they have visuals, whatever it is that will, without a shadow of a doubt, make you understand that indeed this is from this particular individual? Because cases have been bungled up in South Africa, no?
There have been, but in essence you wouldn't go. I mean, it would be irresponsible for the prosecuting authority, the National Prosecuting Authority, to go to court and make arrests if they don't have sufficient evidence to proceed. I mean, so it would be typical that you would have only, once you've crossed a certain threshold in which you think there's a high likelihood of success, you will then proceed against the relevant individual. So one presumes that they've passed that threshold and are therefore now proceeding to move to the next level in the case. And all of this evidence will be tested in a court of law. So it's not as if it's entirely up to the National Prosecuting Authority, but they must be certain that they are going to succeed before you take this kind of action.
Prof, a two-in-one question. One, what do you make of the timing of this? And if we could walk down memory lane and recall her tenure as head of defense.
Well, I mean, much is being made by the accused in this case of the timing, and I would completely disregard that kind of issue, because really the National Prosecuting Authority should proceed regardless of the timing, sensitivity to the period of elections, etc. I can't actually see what relationship that has to it. If they've got evidence, they've passed the threshold, then they must proceed, and they mustn't take into account any other issues. They must proceed on the basis of what they've got. So I think in terms of the sort of the history of the individual, there's obviously quite a lot of concern over her conduct over a number of years. So what we're seeing now doesn't appear to be inconsistent with the kind of conduct that has occurred over time, but none of those particular issues were finally tested in court or dealt with properly or dealt with by her own political party, which in many respects is quite concerning, because what you don't want is to have people in senior positions of government and previously members of the executive that are tarnished in this way and continue to operate. But it appears as though people are not terribly concerned about that at a political level. But they should be, because in fact the public is looking on and they want to know that senior officials in government and senior officials in Parliament are actually proper and are honest and decent and don't waste taxpayers' money and are there to act in the public interest. And if they're not there to act in the public interest and are acting in their private interest, they must go. and they shouldn't be allowed to remain in that position for very long.
Just on the work of parliamentarians, and when you speak of the values or the ethics that people should espouse, when you look and you search, are you satisfied that indeed we do have that in South Africa? Now we're talking overall and not just an individual.
Yeah, I'm not sure that has been stuck to, because it appears as though quite a lot of improper conduct has been tolerated. And I really want to raise the issue that people in high public office in any country, and in particular in South Africa, should have absolutely no shred of dishonesty hanging over their heads, because they are actually carrying out, they've been allocated public power. They've been allocated the resources of the state, and they are therefore meant to be held to a higher standard than many other people in South Africa. A much higher standard, and what we are seeing systematically is that they're held to a very, very low standard. People who have many allegations against them and lots of evidence against them are being retained in Parliament and being retained in the executive, and not being penalised politically or being penalised in the courts adequately. And this is obviously a major concern. You can't run a country or a government with these kinds of individuals continuing to operate for long periods of time in positions of public power.
You go to Parliament's website and you go to the tab, Our Parliament, and then you'll find Who Are We? It reads, Parliament plays a direct and active role in national affairs. It is the place where the members of Parliament look after your interests. That would be you and I. Members of Parliament have many responsibilities, including making laws that will improve our lives, discussing and debating government policy and other political issues, consulting with you, the people, and representing your views in Parliament, helping people in their constituencies, approving the budgets of government departments as represented by Parliament by the Minister of Finance, making sure that the work that government promised to do is being done, and checking that public money is being spent wisely. And so you've got political parties that are calling for a motion of no confidence against the Speaker of Parliament. One, what is your view on that, right? What impact does this have on the work of Parliament, if at all? Because this still has to go through a number of tests and it still has to be proven. What laws can then trigger whether she will be removed or should be removed as the Speaker of Parliament?
In essence, she can be removed by a resolution of Parliament that's agreed to by a majority in Parliament. And she's taken special leave. I don't know what that is, but she's taken her own personal unilateral special leave without the authority of Parliament, which in itself is highly problematic. But you cannot also have somebody who's being charged or going through this kind of process sitting in such a position. So it's quite proper to call for the person's removal. The honourable thing would have been to resign and to then challenge in court all the allegations made against herself, but she's chosen rather to sit in that position and continue. I think that's untenable. I think it's right that the resolution has been brought. The question now is really whether or not the resolution will pass. But in my view, it would be proper for the resolution to pass. She's not fit to be in that position at this stage, and she needs to clear her name in court. And if she can't clear her name in court, then she must go to jail. But if she can clear her name in court, then she can take appropriate action thereafter. But she shouldn't be sitting in the position of Speaker while the cloud is hanging over her head.
Where accountability is concerned, the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa's website reads, because MPs are elected representatives, they must be accountable to the people of South Africa and they must act in the public interest. Are political parties acting in the public interest where this issue is concerned? Of course, legal processes must take their own way, but when it comes to representing South Africans and acting in the public interest, are we seeing political opportunism here at play? Because history has a likelihood of repeating itself. Today it can be this particular individual, tomorrow it's another individual. What do you perceive needs to be done, I guess, as a blueprint on how MPs should essentially act in the public interest?
Well, essentially, Parliament, it operates in terms of its own rules, and it is within their jurisdiction to bring such a resolution. But you would want it to be brought only when the matter has risen to such levels that it is appropriate. And in this case, this is a person who's going to be charged with a serious crime of dishonesty, accepting bribes in a position of public authority. That is somebody who shouldn't be. If that ends up being true and proven in a court of law, that kind of person can't be in government. Now, the fact that the National Prosecuting Authority has felt that these charges or allegations have passed a particular threshold is already an indication that it's very, very serious, and that makes the position untenable. But if somebody, this is the first speaker where this has happened in the history of South Africa in 30 years. So it's not that political parties are necessarily opportunistically going and asking for votes of no confidence. But you would want Parliament not to exercise this authority unless a particular threshold has been passed, unless there is a valid case. The question really here is whether politics works in the other direction, whether somebody will be protected when they actually should be removed. And that, I think, is going to be an important thing to watch in the next few days. In the case of the ANC, they have their step-aside rule. And the step-aside rule has been shown to be a pretty weak and flaccid measure to deal with members of the executive who have potentially committed serious crimes against people of South Africa. So the public interest must come first. So if somebody is merely protecting their position, using their political party to protect their private interest, that's a problem. But the Parliament and its resolutions are very much a political process, but there's also meant to be a judicial process that will proceed if the Speaker is charged. But we will see how those proceed. These are two quite distinct processes, but the question is, can Parliament sit with somebody with these kinds of charges, sit and continue with the Speaker with these kinds of charges hanging over their head? And what does that do to the authority of Parliament, given that it both supervises government, the executive, and makes laws for South Africa, and you've got people with these kinds of charges hanging over their head, sitting in that position, presiding over processes of passing legislation and supervising the executive?